Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. We've all calmed down a little bit. At least I've calmed down a little bit after our Post-Levy departure reaction the other days, but plenty has continued to happen. I'm Marcus Buckland, delighted that George Sessions from BA, very much with an inside feel to everything that's happening at Tottenham, is here. So too is Tom Barclay from The Sun, who's a busy man. He's promoting his book, and we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. And he's also got his finger on the pulse. There's no Tom Allnut today. For some reason, he thinks going to Spain to interview Robert Lewandowski is more important than being part of the Tottenham Way podcast. And there'll be a disciplinary hearing at the end of the week to discuss that. But I'm sure Tom will have some interesting revelations maybe about Lewandowski coming to Spurs in January. Who knows? But there is so much to get stuck into. And first of all, Mr. B, I think we should pay tribute because I've spent the past 3 or 4 days trying to do other things and then being drawn back to the miracle in Bilbao, your fantastic book that you wrote basically in the space of a month. And it's a brilliant story. It tells, first of all, in brief detail, Ange Postecoglou's first season at Tottenham, and then everything that happened last season from 17th place in the league to this extraordinary European adventure culminating in the never-to-be-forgotten night in Bilbao. And the only issue you've got really is that subsequent to getting the book written up, Daniel's gone. Andrew's moved on to Nottingham Forest, and we'll talk about that as well. So when you get to the paperback version at Christmas, you can add a few things in. But just tell us briefly why you decided to write the book, how you wrote it so quickly, and what message you're particularly trying to get across in it.
Thank you, Marcus. Very kind for us to do this podcast and sort of talk about the book a bit. I mean, essentially, I've always wanted to write a book. It's been sort of a passion of mine to do it at some point. And I felt that last season, even though I haven't actually been covering Spurs for that long, and I'm fairly new to sort of living in the space that you guys as fans have been living in, for all your lives pretty much, I recognised very quickly that it was a unique season, not just obviously winning a trophy and a European trophy the first time in 41 years, first trophy in 17 years, but just the sort of balmy nature of it, really, with what happened in the Premier League. I can't think of another campaign in the Premier League like it for any other team. I mean, you could talk about maybe a Wigan winning the FA Cup and getting relegated, but it really, to my mind, is not the same because of where the standing is of the two clubs. And you had at the centre of it some fascinating characters. Obviously, Ange Postecoglou, who we'll come on to later for obvious reasons, is absolutely central to the book because I think most people realise that having listened to the press conferences and these podcasts, my YouTube and the stuff I've written, know that I like him. I've always liked him and really appreciate him as a journalist for his amazing lines he comes out with. I know, Marcus, you recognise that, but don't really fancy him so much as a football manager, and that is fair enough. But as sort of storylines go, it sort of demanded a book, really. And I was thinking about it through the season, but obviously it really is dependent on them having a great end to it. Nobody will want to read a book where it ends, all in tears, and then they just look back on an awful season, which really did sum up the knife edge he was on going into that final. As Dan, dearly departed Dan Kilpatrick tried to explain, and I think he had a valid point. It was just in the way that he phrased it, which got Ange's back up and made massive headlines at the time. Obviously, that comes into the sort of denouement of the book. But once that had been achieved, and I was lucky enough to be out there at the San Mamés Stadium and sort of witness history, to be honest, and not just history from a Spurs perspective, albeit that's obviously the target audience for this book, but just recent football history, given the nature of the rest of the season. I just thought, why not? And the last couple of summers, I've been at the Euros, and then before that, I was at the Under-21 Euros, and then Tottenham's pre-season tour in Seoul, which gave me a great foundation, to be honest, for the book. Starts off a bit with about sort of Conte and then leading into Postecoglou's first season. So I was essentially, away a lot, very busy. And this one, for once, not so busy, or at least not away, So my wife was delighted to find out that I would spend every waking minute during that sort of mad month, 6 weeks, I suppose, between June and July. Getting up at 5 a.m., going to bed after midnight, around work and family to write this story. But obviously, I had the basis of it was all there from all my pieces, and not just mine, George's, Ali Gold, all the guys throughout the season, as touch points. And then it was about sort of collating it and then speaking to various sources in the aftermath to get a feel for, decisions that were made to hopefully shed some sort of fresh insight over those decisions throughout the season.
Well, you've definitely managed to do that. Now, George, I know you and I differ just a little bit when it comes to Ange Postecoglou. But the one thing that I realised at the time, obviously doing all the pods with the boys last season, from a journalistic point of view, the guy was worth his weight in gold. I just wonder now, with the benefit of a bit of hindsight, how you actually sum up what Ange did, because it's an incredible story that Tom tells so well. But I'm still not convinced that Ange deserves a huge amount of credit for it. And I'll get umbrage, and I'll get a lot of Australian fans in particular screaming at me about that. But, 3 or 4 months on from what all happened, George, how do you sum up that 24-25 campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it is the sort of campaign that definitely deserves a book. So Tom's done an amazing job. And I won't confess to have said that I've read every single page. I've kind of, tried to go over as much as possible these last few days. But it is the detail when it is remarkable. And Marcus, there is so many bits in there, so many of Ange's quotes that are just, those kind of killer lines that we all, whether you was Ange in or Ange out, you would laugh or you would be like, yep, he's bang on the money there. I mean, I obviously think, he deserves enormous respect for winning the Europa League. And I guess maybe we'll get onto it a little bit when it comes to sort of talking about Nottingham Forest and him going there, which I'm really pleased for him, actually. So I just wanted to ask you kind of how much of this book was kind of, things that you already knew because you were living it and breathing it in the moment versus kind of speaking to sources afterwards and then getting those extra bits of detail. Because I imagine when it's happening, you talk to people, they can't tell you Angie's going to go, etc. If they lose, but once it's all happened and you kind of after the time has passed, I'm guessing people are a bit more willing, obviously, kind of confidentially, to speak about stuff like that. And how much more did you find out that you actually didn't know during the time of the actual season?
A bit of both, really. But yeah, there was definitely stuff that kind of, with the passing of time, became clear that how they sort of transpired. Whether it be transfer targets that were pursued or came off. Speaking to sort of sources around various different influential figures at the club, how they went about going after certain players. There's a particular Spanish top player that they looked at, which I don't remember being reported at the time. So that was, news to me when I sort of discovered that later. That kind of pricked my ears up. Lots of them, because George and Marcus, to be fair, but particularly the guys who write on Tottenham every day, when you hear stuff that you're like, I didn't realise that, and it's not like I know everything. I haven't read like every single cough and spit of everyone's copy throughout the season, so there might be stuff out there that I thought was new and then actually has been reported before. But it's just it's been quite interesting to have it kind of crystallised after the fact. And then what I hope, the book sort of tries to shed a light on is I feel like I've got quite a good understanding over speaking to sort of sources close to Postecoglou and other people at the club, how the season, when he was in most jeopardy, when he wasn't, sometimes might be quite surprising, when he kind of hatched this plan to attack the Europa League. And I know fans will always be sceptical perhaps over how that happened, but I think personally, the performances in the knockout stages of the Europa League kind of speak for themselves, and how stark and how different they were to pretty much all the Premier League campaign, that it was obvious that a change had happened. And I think it hopefully shed some light on how that was kind of thought up and how it was carried out and how the team was sort of motivated going into the final. And other
Can
bits
I
like
ask
that.
one question on that then, Tom? Because I haven't got to that stage in the book yet. But, from Ange Ball, it became Ange Wall. Was that all down to him, or are we going to learn from your book that basically he was told change things now?
No, my understanding is it was down to him, and a lot of part of that is when you look at how he had won various competitions in the past, admittedly in less high profile circumstances and lesser standard. Let's be honest. He would often revert, surprisingly, given, well, maybe not surprising at the time, but surprisingly as observers of his Tottenham team for most of the time, to a more pragmatic style. So there was kind of, that was part of it. And I think there was a sort of, I believe, and I'm led to believe that there was a sort of realization of what was the best way of approaching the Europa League with the teams that were left in it. So, obviously I'm not going to reveal everything that's in it because I want people to read it. But for example, there was a thinking going into the knockout stages that only really Athletic Bilbao had the technical brilliance with the likes of Nico Williams to really blow teams away. At least that was the thinking. And that a pragmatic style would well be a likely successful route to getting through against the likes of Frankfurt, Man United. Obviously, that's how it transpired. I mean, it begs the question, and I still don't really have a good answer on why this wasn't done in the other competition, even if the idea was that
because Tom, that's not who we are, mate. That was George. Come on, back to you then. And I know you love him, and there's a lot to love about him. But surely he had to be more flexible before the last few weeks of the Europa League campaign.
I think we would have seen it this season. I think he would have been more pragmatic this season. Now, the only thing I would say is actually, if you go through the cup competitions throughout that season, and one of Spurs' best wins, I think, was the 1-0 against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup first leg of the semi-final, and it wasn't a scratch Liverpool team. Some people sort of sometimes say that, but Van Dijk was playing, Mo Salah was starting as well, and that was 1-0. I think Spurs had around 40% possession, but it was kind of very similar to those Europa League knockout games where Spurs were very, very, I wouldn't say they were completely pragmatic and kind of low block, but they were very hard to break down. The pressing wasn't quite as frantic as we had seen in various other points. It was a lot more controlled, and they were waiting for their moment to go for Liverpool. And obviously they got the goal in the end with Bergwijn. But there was a few occasions like that I kind of felt during last season where Spurs were more pragmatic. And I generally always thought that going into this season, Ange would marry it up a bit more. And I guess that's just kind of where I sort of, I completely understand some fans thinking he's rewritten history when it comes to the whole we prioritise the Europa League. But I do think the evidence is there. He made 7 or 8 changes pretty much every week from March time, once those knockout games kicked in, all the way through to the end of the season. And when you actually look back, obviously 17th, 22 defeats, not good enough, absolutely. But when you look back, Romero, Vicario, and Mickey van der Ven played 5 of those 22 defeats. They finished at 5 of those 22 defeats. So you got 17 of them. You're missing either your first choice goalkeeper or both, or one of your first choice centre backs. You only have to look at what happened to Liverpool a few years back when Van Dijk was injured for a spell, and Arsenal a couple of years ago, they collapsed when they were about to win the title when Saliba got injured. Once you take some of those key players out, it does. It can be like a pack of cards. It can fall apart, and clearly that shouldn't be the case. But that's where I look at the board and Daniel Levy now no longer being there and say Ange should have had a better squad. And if he did have a better squad, then he wouldn't have had to pick one or the other. But the thing I would kind of finish on is what we know for 100% for certain is Ange prioritising the Europa League and doing what he did with the Premier League. It paid off. Now, we don't know. It might have worked if he'd played Romero and Van der Ven in the Premier League, but we don't know that. They might have got injured. Spurs might have lost to Frankfurt or to Bodo, and we wouldn't have Bilbao. But what we do know is the decision he made, it paid off. And that's why I'll always forever be grateful for him, because, 17 years is a long, long time to wait for a trophy. And even the way it panned out and transpired, it probably couldn't have been more dramatic and more knife edge, for Spurs. And it is so Spurs the way he did it. So I'll always be grateful to him.
It's interesting what you say, Marcus. I was just going to say that on top of that, George. I mean, what you say about centre back. I think often as fans, we probably just devalue the importance of the sort of stalwart centre back in a team, and you just. It's weird. Like, you lose a striker and you think, oh, the team are really going to struggle. And then if they have their best centre back out, a lot of fans just think, oh, someone else will slot in. But that really was key last season, losing those two players. And there's a reason why Thomas Frank wanted another key centre back this summer. He didn't get one, so we'll wait to see how much that affects the team or not. But I do think the club have learnt from the mistakes of last season regarding recruitment. Whilst a lot of exciting young players were brought in, I believe there was an over-reliance on youth, which they paid a price for in the league. And you can tell by the strategy they've had this season how that's been corrected to a certain extent. And I hope the book sort of, I'm pretty sure there was a feeling from lots of other people that was the case, given what I know and what I've written in this book about the kind of players that certain people wanted. So hopefully that sort of gives a bit of flesh on the bones to that side of things. And then also the other thing about the book, which I hope, so it's not all just a sort of analysis of what went wrong and what went right. More than anything, and what I wanted to do with this book was capture a moment. This is a moment that might never happen again, or might take ages for it to happen again. I mean, Spurs might not win. It might be 17 years, or maybe this will be the groundwork for, an absolute golden age for Tottenham. Who knows? But given that I was at most of the matches and press conferences, just like the other guys. I mean, I'm not saying that no one else could have written it. I'm sure they could have, but it felt like something that I wanted to capture that can basically be, on the shelves of Spurs fans forevermore, even if nothing else happens, for them to look back on. And the way that I've tried to try and accentuate that, Marcus, you'll know, and hopefully from reading bits of it, is the start of it. The first season is done in the past tense, but then the rest of it, barring the epilogue at the end, is all in the present tense. And the point of that is to give it some immediacy, to try and sort of transport you back to that time for good and definitely for bad for a lot of it. Hopefully people, get through it, through the difficult times. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a fair bit of skim reading around December and January from readers. But, I am obviously aware that the major selling point is this miracle in Bilbao, as I put it. And I do think it's there's a sort of dual edge to the title, because, obviously miracle in the sense that Spurs haven't won anything for ages, but it's more the miracle given all that had come before it in the season. But that final chapter is the one that is the longest, and hopefully really breaks down in forensic details. Henry Winter was very kindly used that word in his review of it, over that whole process, particularly the day itself of that final at the San Mamés Stadium.
Listen, I love the ending of the May chapter. As we all know how it ended after that, but I love how you've ended that part. I thought that was really good, and then going into the epilogue, and we talk about what actually did happen. I like that.
What do you mean?
And I'm not just saying it. Sorry, Tom. I was going to say, I'm not just saying it because you're here, but it is. I mean, I love the way you change the tenses around, and it does give it that immediacy. And Henry Winter has mentioned it. We all mentioned it. It's a must read for all Spurs fans. Get out there, buy it today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's more than enough, Marcus. Thank you. I guess we don't want to try and oversell it, but George, you're talking about the final, at the end of the May chapter. I suppose the start of the May chapter, begins with Keith Birkinshaw and looking back on what happened there, because there is obviously a parallel between what happened to Ange, and it's sort of interesting going back through it at the time rather than after the fact, because at the time suddenly those stories popped up of like, the what could happen if he does leave, then it will be a repeat of 1984 all over again. And obviously that's what transpired. But the idea is, as you allude to, the end of that chapter is like, what will it be that way? Will it not? What will happen? And even though we know the answer, hopefully that sort of gives people a jolt back to that feeling of uncertainty at the time.
Well, and now we do know.
Yeah, I was going to
We
say
know
it's just the extraordinary thing that since you wrote that last word, Ange's gone and he's now at Nottingham Forest. Daniel Levy has gone. So the world changes very quickly. And I do want to bring it round to the appointment yesterday of Postecoglou to succeed another former Spurs manager in Nuno Espirito Santo at the City Ground. And on the face of things, that's a very risky appointment because you're going from one footballing philosophy to a completely different one, unless, as George has hinted, Ange's going to be much more flexible this time around. I mean, from my point of view, I think that the three things he has to work on to make it successful, and of course he's got an opportunity to go and win another European trophy this season, and because of the history of Nottingham Forest, that obviously would be a remarkable narrative as well. But is he going to be able to maintain this different philosophy when required with the new set of players he's got? Is he going to pay more attention to some of the minutiae, in particular the set pieces? That was one of the things that really got under my skin last season, the fact that he kind of dismissed the importance of set pieces. And then I think the most important thing, will he be able to just alter what they do in training, et cetera, to avoid all the injuries that obviously he had at Spurs, and he also had at Celtic prior to that as well. So that's been a little bit of a recurring theme. And for me, those are the three areas he's got to work on. I've got to say, particularly bearing in mind how that club is run, I worry. I don't know. I think De Forest come to Tottenham in April. I mean, everyone's looking forward to giving him a round of applause then. I mean, hopefully he's still in a job. But come on, George, being honest, is this sort of a real leap into the dark for Forest, or is there some sanity behind the potential madness?
I'll tell you, Ange will win at Spurs in March. I can see it already. There'll be boos at full time, which he was used to in the end, but there'll be for Thomas Frank, I'm sure of it. No, I mean, it is actually similar in a sense to him coming in after Conte, wasn't it? Everyone was, after Conte, it was completely the polar opposite style of football. And he come in and people were like, oh, okay, how's Spurs going to quickly shift? I think what's very different and what I don't think Ange has ever done before is he's coming in mid-season. So that's why I think there will be a sense of pragmatism. He's not going to come in and Forest is not going to play Ange ball on Sunday away at Arsenal. It's just, he hasn't got anywhere near enough time. And he's also got the Europa League schedule. So that's why I just think you'll see kind of certain principles that he'll try and embed. And I imagine they will try and play with a high line. I don't think it's going to be the crazy high line we saw in the Chelsea game, for example. And when I look at their squad, I know there's a little bit of, I guess one thing I'd say first of all, I don't really like the kind of condescending nature that's been around this a little bit. And I'm not talking about you, Marcus. I'm just saying in general, there's a little bit of a, this guy's a Premier League flop. How has he got another job? I mean, the guy won the Europa League. He won Spurs' first trophy in 17 years. So, give him a bit of respect, first of all. But I also think that this squad, I'm sure Ange was interested in James McAtee. I'm sure Douglas Luiz was being linked to Spurs at one point. Callum Hudson-Odoi was. Obviously, Morgan Gibbs-White was. I imagine Ange would have wanted Morgan Gibbs-White sort of if he had stayed at Spurs. So there's a lot of players there that he would have wanted anyway, first of all. And secondly, when I kind of look at their defence, okay, Milinkovic is probably not going to be great in the Mickey van der Ven role, but actually, Nico Williams is very quick. Ola Oina is also very quick. And I think Morello could probably play, not too high, but I think he has got the pace to kind of get back. So I don't think it's going to be as hard to kind of shift the style from Nuno ball, to Ange ball. But like I said, I don't think it's going to be full on Ange ball. I think it will be a little bit more pragmatic. And also, Forest have got some brilliant footballers. Don't forget, Elliot Anderson's just had 2 great games for England. So I honestly think he'll do well. I think, I probably could see a kind of a scenario where in 18 months' time it's all gone to pot because Marinakis does kind of have this tendency to hire and fire quite quickly. He did it with Steve Cooper, which felt like the wrong thing at the time, but did pay off in fairness. And Forest fans are probably thinking this is the wrong thing now. But honestly, I would say to Forest fans, get behind Ange because he took Spurs on a journey. And okay, the roller coaster did go down at various points, but it got to its destination in the end. And he will be, he was brought up on a diet of European Cup finals, so he'll know well the history and about old Big Ed as well. So I think Forest fans will love him. To be fair, after a little bit of time.
Tommy, win or bust for you?
Oh, Yeah, George, you're absolutely right. I'm sure he'll be rolling out the history of Forest very soon to get fans on side, and he genuinely loves it, doesn't he? As well. Uh, I did a piece yesterday, sort of basically kind of talking him up, and why it might work. And George has sort of touched on quite a few points about it. Sorry, I hope you can't hear my dog in the background whining. And when Ange left Spurs, I was made aware that he wanted to get back into the Premier League, and he's had offers from Al Ahly, or if not direct offers, then definite heavy interest from Al Ahly in Saudi Arabia, from LAFC, Sonny's team, obviously in America, and Bayer Leverkusen to take over after Ten Hag. There might be others as well that I'm unaware of, but I'm pretty sure those three have big interest in him. But he always wanted to stay in the Premier League. He had his family pretty settled in England, having obviously moved around the world for years. And he was sort of wondering which club suits. And I couldn't really think of one because I thought, a team that's on the same standing as Tottenham, Villa or Newcastle or above that, Man City, Liverpool, it was too risky. Whether you're going for the Champions League, whether you're trying to win the title, a manager who's overseen 22 defeats at a club like Spurs, it seems too risky. If you're a team like Palace, Brentford, West Ham, one false move could actually you could end up in a relegation scrap. It feels too risky. Maybe a team that got promoted, but would he be interested? Maybe, I suppose, with Leeds or a Sunderland, given their history, but he has just won the Europa League. I think maybe he's shooting for a bit higher than that. And I kind of neglected to think about Forest. I think Forest are kind of in this almost out on their own. Some might argue because of European football, they are in that category that I mentioned of Palace and Brentford and West Ham, but I actually think they're better than that. I think, as George has pointed out, I think the squad's really good. But also, even though Marinakis in his statement yesterday has basically told Ange to go and win trophies or challenge for trophies, I don't think externally there's really any expectation that they definitely should be winning trophies and they definitely should be in Europe. If anything, it's a bit of a bonus. And then you look at the squad, and first of all, people are just assuming he's going to play Ange Ball's style from the off, which, as George points out, I don't think he will, given that he's come in midway through the season, and he does need to learn from the lessons that he had at Spurs, in my opinion, injuries, all those points that you made, Marcus, perfectly. I was thinking exactly the same thing. But, Elliot Anderson, as George pointed out, if you look at his stats, albeit from a small sample size of the Premier League so far this season, he is either top or second in the league for a number of things, from passing in the final third, from tackling, from carrying the ball. He seems the ideal player if he does want to go with a holding midfielder, like we saw Bissouma do well for about 6 weeks and then struggle. Maybe he could do it. Gibbs White is the perfect kind of number 10. He likes, to be honest, a battering ram poacher finisher up front. That's how he played at Celtic a lot of the time. I think Chris Wood actually fits that. Zinchenko's just come in. If he does want to play as inverted fullbacks, as essentially number 10s, he actually, we're not quite sure where he's at in his career, but theoretically, he's got that talent, as does Ola Aina. So the more I think about it, even though it's such a gear shift from Nuno, there are actually sort of reasons why it could work in that change. But I just, from my perspective, I'd like him to do well. I feel like he really does need to take on board some of the things that happened. I'm sure he will never admit it publicly in press conferences, because you know how stubborn he can be, and he doesn't want to sort of give it up to the media, or at least you're going to have to do your time before he starts, taking on your points, in any kind of way. But personally, behind the scenes, I hope they sort of learn a bit in that way, particularly when it comes to injuries, because I think it's an inconvenient truth for Ange that the level of muscle injuries seems to go up at every team he manages, and he can argue to the cows come home that it's not down to him. But I do feel like there's got to be some influence from the way he goes about things that has led to that.
Well, listen, I think we'll all love it if he does well. And George is quite right. Whether you were Ange in or Ange out, he brought us a magnificent night in May. And he can certainly further endear himself to all Spurs fans if he gets a result in his first game at the weekend. And I'm sure his first signing, when the January transfer window opens, would be Yves Bissouma. Didn't they get on well towards the end? But I mean, Basuma, what's going to happen to him? That's for another day. Listen, we've got lots of other things we need to get through, including a mention of Djed Spence, who got his first England cap, of course. And if you've seen the video of Harry Kane giving him his cap in the dressing room, I'm sure there was a big smile playing across your face because it's just a great story. But we've got some great questions as well, which we need to get through. And thank you very much for all your correspondence. Do get in touch, and don't forget you can listen to us as always. You can watch us. I'm looking a bit rough today, I'm afraid. It was a bit of a late night last night. Got to be more professional now. We're on YouTube, but we'll give you all the details, our YouTube and our Instagram accounts, etc. at the end. But we have some questions, and some of them are centering most interestingly, I think, guys, in terms of the transfer market, but not so much who we are buying, but our methodology when it comes to selling. And an example of that is Rich Spicer, who's been in touch from Perth, and he says, love what you guys do. Thank you very much, Rich. The thing that doesn't seem to get discussed when it comes to Tottenham Hotspur is the selling side. Most fans agree that Spurs need to get a lot of players out the door because they aren't good enough and they're taking up position spots that we will need, but no one is trying to buy them. And he goes on to say, Chelsea don't have a problem with outgoings, even for expensive players who've hardly played, and they get good money for them. The same for Liverpool, Arsenal, Newcastle and Aston Villa. He finishes by saying, imagine you're a chairman thinking about which player you want to buy, contemplating negotiating a fair price with Daniel Levy. Obviously, this was written just before the momentous news of last week. The drawn-out process of painful haggling over every single detail. You would just go to the next player on the list. It all needs to change. Really good point. And I guess the question I've got to ask you now, George, is it going to change? Because Daniel Levy has gone out of the door. Will Spurs become an easier club to deal with? Will we be able to shift some of our dead weights, if that's not too unfair a description, rather more easily than we've done in the past?
I think it is fair to assume Spurs will be easier to deal with. Daniel Levy, whether you sort of, like what he did from a business point of view and don't like what he did from certain football decisions, he had that reputation as a really tough negotiator. And I think, I've listened back to the last pod and I thought it was brilliant, guys, to be fair. And, certainly you all made brilliant points. I think it was Tom Allnut who was saying Spurs kind of outgrew that kind of, tactic in the transfer market of trying to haggle and get the price down, whether you're buying or whether you're selling. And I think really, when you look at kind of some of the modern owners, and Chelsea were mentioned in that brilliant email from Rich. I mean, Todd Bowley is clearly not perfect, but I tell you what, he knows how to maintain relationships. How many players and people has he taken from Brighton, and they keep going back? And I tell you probably why that works is because Brighton are a club that correctly have a price on a player or on a coach. And if you come in as the club and you do it in a respectful way, you're not trying to haggle over the last few million, they will allow you to buy that player and they will allow that person to go. And I think, Chelsea are kind of a good example that maybe Spurs should follow, actually. They go in, they pay the money, and then when it's vice versa, when they need to sell a player, they sell to Arsenal, they sell to Aston Villa. I think Spurs in this kind of post-Levy world will hopefully benefit from Levy not being there and Vinai being the kind of main, whether or not he's the main person with negotiations or not. He's going to be such a key figurehead. He's got such great relationships with so many Premier League clubs that hopefully it helps Spurs sell, because I think that's clearly been a big issue over the last few years, and whether that's kind of the best players that Spurs have had, because I've always kind of wondered whether actually they needed to sell bigger players at the right time and they didn't. I'm sort of thinking Dele Alli when he was kind of mentioned as a 100 million player to Real Madrid, or kind of a Brian Hill that probably should have gone out the door a few years ago, and Yves Bissouma is now in that category as well. I definitely think this should hopefully help Spurs going forward, that if you're going to negotiate now with Spurs, you're not going to have to deal with Daniel Levy giving you a figure which seems astronomical for a player like Yves Bissouma that, is unfortunately wildly, not consistent.
Tom, before you come in, I'll read a couple more on this subject. Listeners on X, first of all, at Luke Spurs says, the inability to sell is hugely impacting the ability to buy. We just don't sell. And also, yes, the value of the club has risen, but what were the transfer fees back in 2006? And obviously, that's a very relevant point. We spoke about how Spurs was worth 80 million in 2001, now up to 4 billion, whatever. But of course, things have changed. And Jai's been in touch and says, It all depends partly on how good Takai is. That's a player that we've kind of forgotten about, who was bought right at the start of the window. We seem to have all forgotten him. Obviously, we'll take time for him, but we don't know. The big four are all good signings. And Sev says 5 out of 10 in terms of a mark for our work in the transfer market during the summer. Not enough, too short as usual. Too short in terms of 2 players short. So, Tom, out of 10, how would you judge Tottenham's transfer business this summer?
I think I'll give it a 7. I say I don't think it was stellar. I think it was a good window, had a good end to it. But as I sort of mentioned in the last pod, and I did last word on Spurs as well last night, and I was sort of making a case. Traitor, mate, you're on it all the time. You got a few mentions. They're great guys, and also to be fair, I don't see them really as sort of rivals, I suppose, because they're kind of doing something. We were talking about it yesterday. This is more of a apart from you, Marcus, albeit you are actually a journalist as well. But I think often we think of you as the
allegedly
sort of fan part of this. We're obviously USP is more the journalistic space. But anyway, those guys are amazing. How much they do and it was lovely to talk about the book yesterday with Jason and Ricky. But anyway, the point I was making was I still feel like this summer's business, even though you can sort of make the case for why they're all positive signings, and I think they should be, were still fairly opportunistic signings. It wasn't like they prized someone from a club who really didn't want to lose them, and aka Liverpool for Alexander Isak was obviously the prime example. Not saying that I would expect that, but kudos, Liverpool, West Ham needed to sell or happy to sell. Palhinha's alone. Simons, by my understanding, is Leipzig wanted to let him go, and then obviously Colin Mawani's alone on the final day. But I think that said, as I said earlier, I feel like they did learn from the mistakes, to my mind, of last season of being over-reliant on youth. The one benefit of that is those young players have had a lot of football in the last season, probably more than they were expecting, and they've all developed to differing levels, but to the point where a lot of them feel like they can be relied upon in the Premier League. So that's a bonus, albeit one that I think cost Ange to a certain extent. And that you have some experienced faces coming through the door, but there are still question marks over how the likes of Xavi Simons, who seems such a key signing, because that's what Spurs needed even before Maddison got injured, a new number 10, how he'll adapt to the Premier League, how quickly he'll adapt. Will he show the obvious technical quality from the off and be maybe one of the signings of the summer? He clearly has the potential to do that. Or will it take him a while to really get settled and it will prove that, at least in the short term, they should have gone out, really gone and secured Eze when they could have got him. Which is why, for me, that would have been, even though he's a bit older and he didn't have a great game against Andorra, to be honest, that would have, if they got him over the line, it would have accelerated, it would have raised the number. I like the signing of Mawani, though, I have to say, as deadline day signings go, I think that's a real pleasant surprise. We obviously know how keen they were to sign him last January. In fact, Mawani definitely comes up in the book. But obviously he chose Juventus instead. He had a great start at Juventus and then sort of faded a little bit, but you do often find that with loan players, that can happen. But I guess still to that point, he's got something to prove. But to be able to pick up a World Cup final winning player, albeit one who had obviously a moment to forget in that final, who's got bags of experience, who at one point went for nearly 100 million or not far off its PSG, that's really good news. I just hope, from Spurs' perspective, he hasn't just been brought in as a sort of prerequisite to Dominic Solanke being injured for longer than has been sort of suggested by the manager. I'm not saying that I actually know anything about that. I think everyone's sort of radar is up on that, given that they've already got Richarlison as a centre forward and Matisse Tell could obviously play there too. The fact that they brought him in means that, look, if Solanke's out for longer than had first feared, I don't think anyone's going to be shocked. But presuming that isn't the case, he's just a really good addition who should hopefully slot in pretty quickly, even though he's obviously going to have to find his feet in Premier League football, having not played there for the first time.
All right, 7 out of 10. I think I'd go with that sort of score. I don't know about you, George, but have you got the the little message from our South Korean Tottenham fan who is bowled over by what the club's been doing of late?
I do, yeah. 20 out of 10 he is given us. I hope I've said this name right, but it's Jae Han, who is as you say, Marcus, a South Korean fan, the South Korean from Tottenham, somebody from South Korea that supports Tottenham. I should add, he's actually a full-time translator, and he kindly or unkindly says we're the second best Tottenham podcast that he listens to. So hopefully, in the kind of post-Levy world, we can
No, I
get to
think,
first
George, something's
position.
just gone wrong in the translation there. He doesn't mean that at all. He must mean we're the best.
I hope so. But he sent a very long email, and I've abbreviated it a little bit, so I hope he doesn't mind that. But he says, if you rated the past 10 Tottenham summer transfer windows going back to 15, 16, this would easily be top. So for him, that makes it 10 out of 10, first of all. Then when you factor in Christian Romero committing his future to the club, and the fact that Thomas Frank is such a steal, especially because Spurs robbed his entire coaching team from Brentford, that adds an extra 10 points to make it 20 out of 10. So that's an interesting category that he's done there, but fair enough. I'll read these couple of bits from him as well. I expect great things from Frank, and in terms of squad rebuilding, there aren't many better coaches out there who have a proven track record of having done it year in, year out in the Premier League. And this is quite an interesting end. This email did come before Daniel Levy stepped down, but he says, lastly, the Tottenham board, who had the bravery to move on from the manager who finally took the monkey off their back, they deserve some credit. I've been a big fan of Levy, and this summer just reaffirmed my belief. Should we just end the podcast there? Mic drop moment, I think.
That is a little bit of a mic drop moment, but actually he's made some good points, and it's so easy to never be fully satisfied. And yeah, of course, you always want a little bit more. And one or two names came and went, and the way that Eze played for England at the weekend, I'm very glad that he came and then he went. But I remain buoyant. I am excited. I mean, George, we've both given 7 out of 10. I'd be inclined actually to go up to 8. What do you reckon? And how excited also should we be as we move on in a moment? We've got obviously to look ahead to the West Ham game, but also to discuss what Vinai had to say a couple of days ago about the fact that apparently the club is not for sale, but who knows? I mean, come the next transfer window, I guess we've got no idea what to anticipate. But are you happy with what you've seen, George, a couple of games into the new campaign?
Yeah, it's an interesting time, isn't it, to be a Spurs fan? It's I think it is kind of a new era, isn't it? I think we have to say that because Daniel Levy was there for such a long time. So it is, even though Enoch / the Lewis family have also been there a long time, they clearly haven't been as hands-on as Daniel Levy has been. So it does feel like a new era. And I guess when you have something new and something fresh, it does bring excitement. There is going to be a tiny bit of kind of uncertainty because we don't know how this is going to go. But I think everything the Lewis family have said, kind of, I guess, via club sources so far, it does sound exciting. They want to win more and win more often. That's exactly what fans want to hear. And sometimes, as we've seen with Daniel Levy, communication. We always welcome communication, but when it's the wrong things being communicated, we kind of raise an eyebrow. But this is what fans want to hear. We do want to hear that on-field success is going to be prioritised and that the team are going to win more clearly. So I think there is reasons to be optimistic here. And actually, I at various points on the last podcast, I was laughing at and also very interested in. But one bit, Marcus, was when you described Vivian as Viv very very early on, and I did actually check this. So I did ask a source close to the family and said strictly from a podcast point of view, I would always write Vivian in my copy, but I said from a podcast point of view, is she known as Viv around Tottenham Hotspur Stadium? Can we call her Viv on the podcast? And I was told that we can call her Viv on the podcast,
Brilliant.
so we can go with that. You were right with that one.
Well, that's good to hear. But the question I'm going to throw to you, Tom, bearing in mind there have apparently been 2 bids already. Vinai spoke very eloquently a couple of days ago, no, the club is not for sale. And the cynics amongst us go, yeah, of course you say that until you pump up the price and hey presto, suddenly it's gone. So is Viv and the rest of the family seriously here for the long term?
I mean, it's the £4 billion question, isn't it, really? All I can say is that like George, been speaking to people, been speaking to sources close to the Lewis family, and from the moment Daniel Levy left that sort of mad evening, the big question, because I hear the same sort of rumours, and they've been going on for a long time, that this could be a precursor to a sale, or as in they've been looking to sell for a while, all that kind of stuff. And it's been reiterated over and over and over again, to the point now where, in that, I think, excellent interview in terms of a sort of masterclass in communication from Vinai, he was really, really explicit about this not for sale tag. So what we'll say is they do go and sell it now. So a lot of people are going to look very stupid, but I suppose they won't care if suddenly that happens. But that's the feeling I get. And the sort of addition to that, and I wrote this the other day, and I see a few other people did as well, I am under the impression that they're still looking for investment, as Daniel Levy on the record said last season, and that investment is likely to come, and it's likely to come internally, my belief, rather than from an external source. So it's likely to be the Lewis family putting in 100 million, 120 million, whatever it might be, and that's likely to come in, at some point, probably not in the distant future. So if that is, to your mind, an underlining of their commitment, I don't know. It's a question for you, really. If they suddenly do that, which I'm pretty expecting they probably will, would you see that as a sort of statement of their commitment to the club, or do you just think it doesn't really change anything? And I still think ultimately it's like any product, your house, your car, whatever. If someone comes along and offers you a deal you can't turn down, then you will sell. But unless this is an amazing sort of exercise in smoke and mirrors, the message being reiterated so often, if not for sale, I think you have to go off that, really, until proven otherwise. No?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Ultimately, everything has a price, and it will come down to that. And, I was asked actually the other day by Henry Winter as well, would you be happy to have Qatari ownership as a Spurs fan? And that's a really difficult question. And actually, I was on with Sean Custis as well, who's a Newcastle fan, and he was honest and I was honest. I said, look, if I'm trying to play the moral high ground here, no, of course I don't want to have certain types of owners. But the bottom line is we're all football fans, and I'm afraid we're all quite selfish in that regard. And ultimately, we want to win silverware. And I'm sorry I have to hold my hand up and say, really, I don't care who buys the club if they're going to invest lots of money.
Marcus, what about a different question? Now that Daniel Levy has gone, who has been the lightning rod for all the fans' frustration, I mean, don't get me wrong, during those protests, it wasn't just Daniel Levy out, it was ENIC out as well. Apart from that one placard that I saw held up, which may well have been from our South Korean fan saying Levy in, but generally it was all Levy out. Now that he's gone, are you less bothered now about ENIC going, at least in the short term? Because, as you pointed out the other day, Daniel Levy made you feel quite safe. And now it's the sort of slight fear of the unknown, the sort of optimism of the unknown, of a better way forward, but that sort of uncertainty of how it might play out. Maybe now, are you placated, I suppose, by the current situation? Or would you very much, welcome a whole new era?
Do you know what? And that leads me on to two excellent points that a couple of our listeners have made on YouTube. And I'll read those first, actually. Domenico Galdo says, as a Spurs fan since 1972, I want more daring and more doing. And basically, I could have written this, so this is perfect. Is the saying no risk, no reward? Well, in 24 and a half years, the rewards have been meagre. The Premier League has changed since Abramovich and the Qataris have come in, so the money we spend is now insufficient to keep us in the top four. And he went on to say that he backed everything I said in the last podcast. And Designed to Win Lou has also been on YouTube and says, we'll only be impressed if things improve at the club. People seem to be getting overexcited about going into the unknown. No reason to not be positive. But, Tom, as you've said, ENIC are still running the club, admittedly the younger members and not Joe. Time will tell. as to how things develop. So I want to hand it over to Viv and the rest. It's impossible to answer that question. If they're true to their word and they want more wins now and more silverware, and they are prepared to invest in the way that you have to because of the way football has changed, then no problem. Let them stay. But I'm semi-aware that, you know, for all the 24 and a half years that Daniel Levy was in charge of the club, I do feel that maybe at times he did have one hand tied behind his back, because ultimately he was receiving instructions from above. And the other thing I've always found very frustrating, and maybe, George, I'm wrong too, is that there's been Joe Lewis away in his boat in the Bahamas for years, never said a thing about the club, never explained what his desire was, what his passion and vision was for Tottenham Hotspur. And maybe the younger members of the family are going to be like Vinai, more communicative and more able to share in their dreams. And I hope so. But I do think that only time will tell. And if it proves to be more of the same old, then please sell up and bring in somebody else who is prepared to do the business required in the Premier League in 2025.
Yeah, I can understand that kind of sentiment of, you know, has Daniel Levy been operating with one hand behind his back? The only thing that you would kind of think is the way that we all know he has micromanaged Tottenham over the years. I would be surprised if he was if he would allow that to happen. I feel like he was the one largely that was making the big plays. And I guess the big thing, the big gear change with this, and why I think we should be positive about this, is because Tottenham has been Daniel Levy's Tottenham for basically 24 years, and he has been the one that's, you know, at the end of the day, he's green lighted everything, and he all the key decisions, you know, whether sacking Poch, which I thought was the wrong time to do it, you know, whether not backing the team in 17-18 when he should have done, you know, getting rid of Ange. I guess, you know, I think all these decisions he has made, and it does feel like now we're going to have a Tottenham Hotspur where the structure is not just one man. You know, Tom mentioned that brilliant, the brilliant interview that Vinai did with the club earlier this week. You know, he said himself, it is not going to be the Vinai show. You know, he is not just the one man running it all. He's going to be delegating. He's going to be getting people in proper positions. And I believe Spurs hired someone this week, didn't they? Took somebody from Arsenal to come in on board. So I think that we're now going to have a Tottenham Hotspur where you have got somebody in Vinai who's clearly going to be a very powerful person, but he's going to know who to delegate certain jobs to. And you know, it was said in the last pod as well. You know, Spurs have had brilliant people over the years. You know, Michael Edwards, Paul Barber, John McDermott, and they've all been let go or they've all moved on. You know, and we don't know exactly why, but maybe because they wanted a bit more power and they wanted a bit more responsibility. And Spurs have plenty of really good people at that club, and maybe they will now get a bit more responsibility to make decisions across the board. And I think if you have more of a kind of democracy at Spurs where you've got different people making decisions, clearly there's going to be issues at times with that. But I think if you have more voices in there making decisions and challenging each other rather than it just being one person, as it feels like it has been with Daniel Levy, in the long run, that should be positive. And I do think in Vinai, Spurs have got a really good person there at kind of, you know, not necessarily at the top of the food chain, but someone that's going to really lead the club in a good way, because everything you hear from people that worked with him at Arsenal or before just say he's a brilliant human being. And, you know, if you can have more people like that running your football club, I think you're in a good place.
Well, I think, yeah, Tom, I mean, I understand why some people think I'm a misery and I'm cynical and all the rest of it. Listen, and I do apologise if that comes across too much. For my sins, I mean, I do have other things in my life, but for more than 50 years, Tottenham has been up there. And listen, my wife Olivia's nearby. Of course, my wife, my sons, various other things are even more important. But when you care and when you've just been frustrated for such a long time, and I'm sorry, but 2 trophies in 24 years, and we weren't serial winners before that. And my cousin who hadn't missed a game up until 3 years ago, home or away for 30 years. When we were young, we all said, look, we'll see Spurs win the league before we die, won't we? And when you're in your 20s, you say, yeah, of course we will. And suddenly you're in your 50s and you think, well, will we? And I just want that. And because of that, sometimes you get skewed and all the rest of it. So I apologise if sometimes I go over the top, but I look forward to going to that stadium and seeing Spurs play good football. And I just want us to get in a position to taste that glory before, for some of us, it's too late. And that's my excuse for occasionally being a raving nutter on this podcast. Sorry, Tom.
No, that's a classic Marcus impassioned speech. I love it. We love it. We love the passion, Marcus, that you bring, and the perspective you bring of being up in the stands most of the times when we're in the press box. I just wanted to say some amazing questions that we've had. I think, Marcus, in a second you should bring on one more that's quite specific about season regarding ticketing. But just overall, please, guys, keep bringing them in. We love them towards our Gmail address at the Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com. We're obviously on YouTube now at the Tottenham Way Pod, so please subscribe and like it and give us some comments on there. We plan on sort of interacting a bit more on there. We're obviously already on wherever you find your podcast, Spotify, all those places. We're also on Instagram as well at the Tottenham Way Pod. Just really enjoying this sort of growth. We're hoping to sort of increase it and boost it this season and grow a bit of a Spurs community where, yes, a lot of the time it will be the sort of measured journalistic approach where hopefully we could give in some insight into being the sort of handful of journalists who regularly go and ask questions of Thomas Frank. I'm sure we'll wind you up no end with some of the line of questioning, or when we haven't asked something that you really feel we should have, please let us know. But obviously we've also got Marcus's perspective, not just as a fantastic broadcaster and journalist, but regularly being up in the stands, as I say, when we're down writing our copy. And he often will spot things that we won't a lot of the time, or come from a different perspective. So hopefully it's what you guys are liking, and we want to hear more from you and do more podcasts like this where we reflect more your thoughts throughout. And on that note, Marcus, wasn't there one more email or comment we had that you were going to bring up?
Yeah, one more email from Lloyd Brown. Thanks so much for getting in touch, Lloyd. He describes supporting Tottenham as a life sentence, and he's absolutely right. He says he's really frustrated. The new change this season, supporters have to be members before being able to access the ticket exchange system. Another club-owned goal, he says, and I totally agree with you. It's going to make it so much harder, and I just hope that the new broom that's come in will sweep away that change sooner rather than later. We've had the tickets, senior concessions being taken away, etc., etc. No, just don't do it. Make it as simple as possible. When you're paying as much money as we are for season tickets, if we can't go, please don't make it any harder to transfer the ticket. It should be as straightforward as possible. So, Lloyd, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, in a moment, I've got to go and get my charger because otherwise my battery's going to go. So I'm going to throw this one back to you, boys. In a moment, we need to preview the West Ham game. But I did mention Jed Spence a little earlier. Georgie got his cap from Harry Kane in the England dressing room. I mean, I just love Jed Spence. You mentioned actually that cup game against Liverpool last season, first leg of the semi-final. I thought he took care of Mo Salah really well that night. He's just such a fantastic player. He got on the pitch. How excited were you to see him become a full England international? And like me, do you reckon he'll play 100 times for his country over the next 10 years?
Well, it'd be great if he does, because that'd be good news for Spurs. And it feels like after Kane's departure, it's been a while since there's really a Spurs regular in England camp. No, it's brilliant for him, wasn't it? And I've really enjoyed the kind of it. You know, I know sometimes they're a little bit sort of artificial, these kind of videos in the dressing room, but that was a really lovely speech from Harry Kane, someone that obviously knew how much of a struggle it was for Jed at the start of his career at Spurs, and is now seeing it come full circle and make his England debut. So no, it was a brilliant, it was brilliant, lovely little moment that to be captured, and great for Jed as well. Great reward for, as I kind of said before, he's had a brilliant 2025, and yeah, Mo Salah is one of many sort of elite Premier League wingers that have been locked down by Jed Spence. So hopefully he can do the same on Saturday, isn't it, away at West Ham. It won't be Mohamed Kudus on the right for West Ham. He'll be playing for Spurs, and I'm sure he's going to get an interesting reception at the London Stadium if anyone does turn up. But in fairness, this game feels a slightly bit different to how it did 2 weeks ago, because West Ham got a good win to kind of ease a bit of pressure on Graham Potter at Nottingham Forest just before the international break. So I think I always quite like it when this game isn't an evening game. I always feel like the London Stadium is a little bit more lively when it is an evening kickoff. So hopefully Spurs can go there and get a win, the first win of the post-Daniel Levy era, and the first win of the real Lewis family era, I guess.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what the sort of fan reception will be in the post-Levy era. If there was any kind of chanting or how they might take to it, if they're going to mark it in some way, that'll be fascinating. But you're right. I mean, Graham Potter goes and gets his win at Nuno's Forest, who then gets replaced by Ange. It feels like we've got this sort of little circle of teams and managers that keep coming back to each other throughout this little period. But just on Jed Spence, I mean, I was quite surprised to see how, and pleasantly surprised to see how choked up Harry got. I mean, he really was looking quite emotional when he passed that cap over to Jed. He, you're right. He must be very aware of what Jed's been through, trying to fight his way into the Tottenham team. It is such. I mean, I know we've been down this road many, many times, but seeing as he's now made his England debut, it's worth reiterating the point that 14 months ago, I think most people presumed his Tottenham career was going to be over. He was going to leave. I believe Genoa had an option of around £8.5 million, which they didn't take up. I think that was mainly because of their own financial issues rather than being unhappy with Jed. I think that loan actually went better than the ones at Leeds and Rennes beforehand. But, proper sliding doors moment. He fights his way back into the team, doesn't make the Europa League squad for the first half of the season. It only really comes into the team when injuries start to kick in, although Ange obviously described it as a bit of a test he was putting him through. I know fans might be sceptical, but that's what he says. And then becomes the one ray of light through this gloomy, miserable winter for Tottenham, who's only, his light's just shone and shone ever since then, to the point where he's done well. I suppose he's been fortunate to a certain extent, at the expense of Destiny Udogie being injured, that he's had the left side sort of locked down. But now that Udogie's back, there's real question marks over who he starts, Thomas Frank, because obviously Jed can play right back. That's where he should be, but weirdly, it almost feels like he plays better on the left back. Although having said that, if Brennan's going to play left wing, I'm not a huge fan of both of them being right-footed. So does that hinder his chances? Porro's such a creative player that can you really drop him? It's a really welcome headache for Spurs and for Thomas Frank. And I feel like last summer, not this current one, they left themselves a bit short by not bringing another left back. And I don't believe, there was a sort of this big master plan that Jed Spence was going to, emerge like he has to sort of fill that role. But now that he has, I don't really have as much of a problem this summer them not recruiting another left back, because this is a player who's playing for England who wants to start regularly. If you add like another level of competition into those two fullback positions and limit his chances more, you're suddenly looking at a player who's clearly keen to make up for lost time, and you risk sort of causing him to be unhappy by not giving him game time. So the three of them. Yes, this will look foolish if suddenly two of them get injured and Spurs are really left short in the coming months. But you now got three top quality fullbacks at all really good young ages, tied down for a good future, who really can cause a lot of teams problems. So Spurs suddenly look really well stocked in the fullback positions, and I think a lot of credit needs to go to Jed Spence for the way he's improved himself to the level he is at.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic story. I will apologise anyone who's been watching on YouTube. Bit of panic going on here because I couldn't charge up my machine. Technical difficulties. Thank God my son was around. So apologies for any distractions there. Boys, thank you very much. Now in the old days, Dan Kilpatrick, who we miss greatly, but he didn't like doing predictions. But I like a prediction. So West Ham away. Saturday, late afternoon kickoff. I personally, full of confidence. I know we never win before an international break, but I think we're going to pick up three. I think we're going to win 2-0 on Saturday. George?
I will go. I might have gone 2-0 as well, but I will change it up. I'll go 2-1, and I think Kolo Muani to get off the mark. I'll go with that as well.
That is literally what I was about to go for, George. I thought 2-1 and Muani with the first goal, but maybe we should change it up. I think Lucas Paquetá seems like he's in good form. He was someone that I believe Spurs looked at. Obviously didn't come off, and I fancy him to score. And Graham Potter has had a lot of derision, to be honest, in ever since he's been at West Ham for the way it's panned out. But it's been a while since he's really shown why he got that move to Chelsea at Brighton. But this is a guy who's managed a lot of games. He's not an idiot at all, like some people are sort of portraying him as. And I feel like it will be more difficult than maybe some fans would have presumed. Maybe they're not presuming it now after that Forest victory. But Spurs, I hope, will have learnt lessons from the Bournemouth game, and they're boosted by 2 new creative signings. Sorry, just to end on a slight little bit of a self-plug again, just back to the book, just in case anyone's looking to order it. I can just give you a couple of places that you can for Miracle in Bilbao, the inside story of the Europa League Triumph. Obviously on Amazon, if you type in Miracle in Bilbao, you can also go to pitchpublishing.co.uk, Miracle Bilbao. That's the publishers that I've printed it with. And if you are listening to this from Australia, if you go to sanity.com.au and then type in Miracle in Bilbao, that I believe that is the website where you can find it. America at this point, I don't know if it's not quite out yet or able to pre-order. I'm hoping that changes. And for all of the questions, very kindly, I've had about an audiobook, it really is dependent on how successful it is. So if people buy it enough, then maybe it will get turned into an audiobook. And who knows, maybe Marcus might read it for me.
Love to, mate. Great stuff. It really is a good read. By the way, if there are any of you are tennis fans as well, there's another good book out there at the moment, Roger Taylor's autobiography. So do get your 2 for 1. But guys, thank you very much. I hope we haven't put the mockers on Spurs by all predicting a successful Saturday afternoon in East London. But thanks to George Sessions from PA, to Tom Barclay, author extraordinaire from The Sun. As mentioned at the start of the pod, Tom all night is chatting away with his new best mate, Robert Lewandowski, in Spain at the moment. We'll get some insights from him after the game. We will, of course, react imminently, straight away after that West Ham match on Saturday. And as Tom mentioned, do get in touch via all the different options, with any questions, observations, anything at all you want to share with us, and we'll do our very best to give you full and complete answers. Well, full and complete is the same thing. But there we are. Congratulations again to Jed. Fingers crossed that everybody comes back from their various international commitments fully fit and ready to go on Saturday. I'm Marcus Buckland. Come on, you Spurs.